In this video I'm going to be talking about how you can take care of your cherry shrimp and make them live a very healthy life and possibly even breed. So the very first thing you're going to want to think about when it comes to cherry shrimp is their tank setup. Now, cherry shrimp and just shrimp in general are not the kind of animal that you can just keep in a fish tank with fake plants and pink gravel. You want to have a fairly nutrient-rich substrate so you can keep quite a few plants. You don't need full-on, like, absolutely just packed full of plants fish tank, but you do need plants. They can go with every single plant, like any water plant that like isn't poisonous, they will go perfectly with. But the ones they really love, the ones that I find my ones love, is things like moss and sawasatang. They absolutely love playing around inside of it. And when you have shrimp like green jade shrimp, which is the ones I have, they can hide in it and camouflage in it because it's the same color as them. So you're going to want to have a substrate that is pretty thick. I recommend about 1 inch. And you're going to want to have nutrients in it too. Or you can bury a dead fish or add fertilizer, or if you have enough shrimp or other fish in there, they'll just fertilize the plants for you. And obviously when you have a tank like this, unless you have heaps and heaps of plants, which you can easily do, that you just have to have a lot of plants that create a lot of oxygen. But if you don't want to have that many plants, you're going to need a filter. So you can use like heaps and heaps of different filters. Sponge filters, I don't actually have one in my shrimp tank, but sponge filters are probably the best one you can use, but because there's no like big thing, like big holes for them to get sucked up into. But if you don't want that sponge filter, you can use like one of the filters that just suck things up from the bottom, like a hang on back filter, or just ones that stay inside the fish tank. You just need to put a cloth around it, or there's like just shrimp guards, but I usually use things like I cut up socks, like socks with holes in it, or socks that are not, like you just don't want to use anymore. Cut them up and then stitch it into a ring that could fit onto the filter, and run it. Make sure that nothing is like getting underneath it. Make sure nothing's getting up that filter that is the size of a shrimp or bigger. Shrimp are very small, and especially when they start breeding, they will easily get sucked up the filter and stay in there and not be able to get out unless they get through the part that blows it out. But they'll likely just get stuck in the filtration sponges, everything you have in there, they'll just get stuck in there and die. Now, because shrimp can be very sensitive when it comes to the water parameters, you're going to want the heating to be around 15 to 27 degrees. They can go a little bit higher and they can go a little bit lower, but that's what I recommend because you don't want them to be like uncomfortably cold, so they're just surviving but not really thriving, or uncomfortably hot. So in that range, you can apparently keep them to 30, but I feel like that is just a little bit too hot. But I guess it sort of depends on what kind of shrimp you want. And the pH range should be somewhere around 6.5 to 7.5, sometimes even 8. Now, tank mates, you don't need tank mates obviously, but if you do want some, it can be very hard to actually find tank mates for shrimp because a lot of fish love to eat crustaceans, including like loaches. Like loaches are like happy little fish that go well with everything, but they will love to eat shrimp because they're a crustacean, like just like snails. Actually, I don't know if snails are a crustacean, but you know what I mean. So you can keep the shrimp with snails, otocinclus, bristlenoses, tiny tetras. I would be careful with the bristlenoses just in case they try to eat them, because if they can like get their mouth around them, they probably will try and eat them, but they're not going to hunt them and they're not going to try to like suck them up, and like they're not going to purposely hunt them. So once your tank is perfect, like great conditions, you know it's right for the shrimp, you've tested the water, you can actually go out and buy the shrimp. So you can buy any sort of cherry shrimp, whatever. Just make sure that there are no other dead fish in the tank or dead shrimp in the tank, because it's likely there's a disease in there or something just not right in that tank that could easily, when you take them home, just kill them all. And that leads on to actually getting them in the tank, which acclimating them, you have to be a lot more careful than regular fish because they are much more sensitive to just sudden changes in the temperature. So I would recommend doing drip acclimation, which is when you get like a little airline tubing. You can use the same sort of tubing that you use for your sponge filters. You tie a knot in it, so it's just like dripping, and then you obviously use like a regular siphon, like suck on it, and then it drips suck on it so that the water is coming up from the tank you're going to put them in, and then into the bag or tub, whatever you have them in. And then over about 30 minutes, depending on how high the flow is, they should adjust pretty well, and they also have like a feel for the tank parameters, because the parameters change in every tank. There is no tanks are going to be the exact same unless they're all connected, like, unless it's like a tank that has filtration going from one tank to the next. All the tanks with dividers in them. You can obviously acclimate them the other way, which is just, floating them in the water, but this is the safest option. So after a while, the shrimp have settled in, maybe like a day after, you can start feeding them. So what I like to feed mine is all sorts of vegetables. They prefer boiled or steamed ones. They like to eat algae wafers. They like to eat just normal fish flakes and decaying plants as well. That's why I don't feed my shrimp that often. I only feed them like 1 or 2 times a week, because there's so many decaying plants in there, algae. When they shed their skin, or that's what I call it, when they shed their shells, sometimes they do eat that, and that's the thing you can just sort of keep in there. You don't have to pull it out, but it breaks down. But they will sometimes eat that. They will eat decaying plants, obviously. They'll eat decaying fish. They'll eat, say a bug falls into the water, they'll sometimes snack on that. Shrimp and fish don't actually need to be fed that often. A lot of people think you have to feed them every day, and that is the case often with like baby goldfish, things like baby goldfish, baby tetras, whiptails. You have to feed them like 1 or 2 times a day, because they're babies, they're growing. With shrimp, even the babies are going to be scavenging around, eating constantly, so don't feed your shrimp too much, or they will die or get very sick. Same with humans. And once your shrimp have been in that tank for a few months, they've been thriving, growing, when they reach maturity, they will start showing signs of male and female, which it's pretty easy to tell them apart. Well, not really like very easy, but it's not like impossible. So the males are going to be a lot smaller, they're going to be thinner, and they're going to have duller colour, whilst the females are going to be a lot chubbier and much bigger than the males, and they'll also have a saddle on them. So the saddle is like what it sounds like. It's like a horse saddle. It's like a part on their shell that is shaped like a saddle, that is often coloured or just like clearly there. Like you can see there is like a part there that is differently coloured to the rest of the shrimp. So that's how you tell the difference between males and females. And once you have figured that you have males and females, you can start thinking about like getting them to breed. And if you don't want them to breed, you have to separate them, because they likely will breed if they're thriving in that tank. So as long as the tank is stable and it's not constantly changing and fluctuating, they'll feel like they will want to start breeding, because the tank is nice and comfortable. There hasn't been like giant storms, or that's what they think. There haven't been giant storms, giant like evaporating. It's a perfect setting for their babies to survive. And that's like it with most fish, most animals. They'll only breed if they think that their babies are going to survive. So if your shrimp are healthy and they're breeding, and if they're like happy and you've been looking after them, they're going to live from maybe 1 year to 3 years. 3 years is like the max. That's a pretty old shrimp if it lives past. 1 year isn't that young, but it's still pretty young. So like 2 years is probably normal for them to die. 3 years is pretty old. Like 3 years they've lived like their fullest life. And 1 year, obviously it's a little young, but still fine. So that's just the basics. Obviously you can get into much more detail with breeding, with the food, with everything else. You can get into much more detail with, which there are certainly videos on YouTube for all that kind of thing that you can watch. I might even make some other ones in the future. But if you got something out of this video or enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.